you write when you don't need money? All your notes sound alike too much. All of them starts with I love you, honey, but they end with the same old touch. Just for a change, send a nice loving letter and cut out that please remit. Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
Welcome, everybody, back to Word Docs. I'm here with Dr. Amy T. Matthews, Dr. Alex Vickery Howe, and also Dr. Lisa Bennett, who's our very special guest here today.
Hey, Lisa.
Hello!
Hello, Lisa.
We've mentioned Lisa a lot on this show and said we're going to get her in for an interview, and we finally did it.
Hooray! It's so lovely to have you here, Lisa. We've been stuck in the coronavirus lockdown with not enough people to talk to. We've been talking to each other. It's so wonderful to have the interjection of a new person into the mix.
It's so good to be here and to see you virtually, although it would be great to see you in real life. We'll have to do it again when we're all out of lockdown and have a glass of champagne at the same time.
Oh, yes. Now, I've got some chocolate. Have you guys brought chocolate today, or am I going to be rubbing it in again?
I've sworn off chocolate.
Oh.
There was too much over Easter.
I have 12 bottles of Moscato just for
he got
today.
a delivery. He got a Moscato delivery. Oh.
So, Lisa, one of the questions we're going to ask you is how do you reward yourself? How do you celebrate a writing achievement, like a good writing day, a book coming out? Do you go for the chocolate? Do you go for the Moscato?
I go for the champagne. I don't really eat that much chocolate. I did, years ago, but now I don't know. I've kind of, don't kill me, lost the taste for it. Unless it's a really nice dark chocolate, but if it's a beautiful bottle of champagne, yeah, that's my reward. And depending on how hard the writing day is, like even if I haven't finished a story or a book or something, but I really feel like I deserve that champagne after just making it through the day, then I'll reward myself.
Excellent plan.
I like to imagine 100 words. Champagne! Champagne!
Yeah. It gets to the stage where you're like, I didn't delete anything for 5 minutes. Champagne!
Champagne!
If that was the case, though, I would never drink. Didn't delete for 5 minutes yet, right?
So our next question for you was, where do you usually write? Like, do you have a set place you write? Do you write all over the house? Do you have an office?
No, so I usually write in bed. First draft, I like to be really comfy. I like to be able to basically forget my body and just focus on the first draft. Because I don't know about you guys, but the first draft sucks.
Yep.
It's so hard.
Yeah, I hate it.
And so I always have to make myself as comfortable and warm as possible in order to get rid of any of those excuses as to why my writing's going bad. So I do the first draft, comfy in bed, lots of pillows, laptop, and just spend a few hours trying to just get as much written as possible, getting up every now and again, shifting position. But then when it comes to doing the next drafts and editing and doing the final stages, I'm not in my comfy bed. I'm usually sitting at my desk or sometimes on a couch if it's like a writing retreat or something like that. But once it gets down to rewriting, then I get out of the comfy zone and into the serious zone of the desk.
Do you feel I find on a first draft, I feel quite vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like I don't like being looked at or watched.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of it as well, because I tried, for the last story that I wrote, I thought I have a lovely new office at home, first time ever, a room of her own sort of thing. And I thought, I'm going to try being a grown-up and writing at my desk. And it just was so slow and it was so hard and I could hear people out in the house. And so I just abandoned that plan pretty quickly and then retreated to my bed, which is at the other end of the house, and was able to actually get the draft written. Still, I'm not a super fast writer, but it was at least at my normal turtle pace instead of at snail pace.
So what's a turtle pace for you? Like when you say you're not a fast writer, what's an average kind of day?
So super slow. And again, this always changes. The beginning of a story, the beginning of a chapter, the beginning of anything is always really slow. And then as I get towards the end, I go faster. So let's say hypothetically, I have a miracle 8 hours to write. If I manage to get a maximum of 1,800 words written, I'll feel like I've written super fast. in a whole day. But usually I don't have a whole day, and usually it's a half day, so maybe about 4 hours. And if I get 750 words written, I feel like I'm on target in 4 hours. I'm super slow.
Because you, like us, are a Word doc. You are a practicing writer, professional writer, a novelist, a short story writer, and you're a teacher at Flinders University. So you have to juggle all that fun stuff like marking and...
Yeah. So I have to schedule everything like an anal retent. Is it okay to say anal retent on this show? Because that's what I am. So
Alex wouldn't say it, but you can.
Well, like I have to just sort of schedule and go, okay, on that day I'm teaching, so I know I have 2 hours, then prep before or whatever. And then also I like to factor in workout because I am a gym junkie, but also I feel like my brain works better if I do some exercise in the morning. So it's like I schedule in little blocks. And so sometimes I know I only have maximum 2 hours per day to get any writing done. So then I go, okay, I just need to try to go as quickly as I can, which is still not very quickly for me. And so if I only have 2 hours and I get 500 words written, then I feel okay. I think I console myself that usually I find that if I'm writing really slowly, then what I write tends to stay. It doesn't get chopped out. If I'm writing really fast, often it's just like, oh, so repetitive and it's crap, and I end up just deleting half of it anyway. So, you know, whenever people on Facebook or social media post their word counts at the end of the day and they're like, I wrote 8,000 words today, I'm like, I will never do that, first of all, because it drives me bonkers. But also, I feel like if I was to write 8,000 words in one day, it would be 7,000 words of rubbish and 1,000 words worth keeping. So I kind of feel like my slow pace is okay because I tend to keep a lot of it.
Quality over quantity.
I go really slowly. Yeah, I try to think that it's quality over quantity. I mean, some days it's just crap anyways, but most of the time it turns out slowly. But even though the whole time I'm telling myself it's crap, when I look at it later in a more objective view, it's actually okay.
What I like about that is, as you go along, you sort of go from, you know, the bed to the desk as this kind of evolutionary thing. And I think every time I've ever written anything, I'm the opposite. I start off at the desk and I'm the king of the world for a draft or two. And then I just gradually crumple into a fetal lump on the couch, you know, rage crying over edits or whatever. So I kind of admire. I think your trajectory is empowering.
I find though that I'm the type of person that loves rewriting and editing. The first draft is agony. That's where all the self-doubt comes in. That's where I second guess every word that I put down. That's where I, you know, if I don't actually know where the story is going, which often I don't, like I have a kind of vague idea or image of what I want to achieve by the end. But if I don't really know where it's going, then I'm kind of going like, am I just wasting time writing this? You know, the whole time it's agonizing. So once I have a draft down, then I'm like, okay, now we're in serious editing mode. And I'm just like, I kill those darlings without remorse, and it's so much fun. And filling in the gaps and going, there's a gap there, and that's not making sense. And even though it's annoying and you need to write another 500 words, you need to fix that scene. And that I just find so much more enjoyable. But I know a lot of people really like the first draft process where they're just discovering stuff. And for me, it's like, I like discovering stuff in the second draft. The first draft is just really hard all the time. I've had occasional stories where it's not been like that, and they've been just like these miraculous, weird things. But most of the time, it's agony the whole time.
So do you find that you're still a turtle redrafting, or does it get quicker as you do? Like, is that the editing a bit quicker?
Yeah, way faster. So the first draft is really slow. But if I do know what is going to happen towards the end, then I can pick up the momentum. And if it's a longer piece, then, you know, I could get 3,000 words written in one day on a very productive day. But that is always when I'm on the home stretch to the end of the story. It's never at the beginning of the story. But yeah, when it comes to editing and I have everything there with me, then if it's sort of like, no, you need to fill in, you know, a couple more paragraphs there, they come out way faster than when I'm trying to get the structure and get everything down in the first draft. And that's always how it's been. I wish that I could go a bit faster and just sort of go with the flow, but my brain just doesn't let me.
So on a technical question, do you do it all on your computer or do you print out to edit? You know, some people like print it out and cut it up and draw all over it?
Yeah, I used to print things out because I used to think you can actually see things differently when it's on paper compared to on the screen. And I would notice repetitions because, you know, when you're working in your document and it scrolls and you don't really realize that you've said the same word like 3 times above the scroll line. So printing it out would help draw those sorts of things to my attention. But nowadays, I tend to just be, well, I don't have a printer at home. So I tend to be too impatient to wait to get to a place that has a printer. And so I end up just doing all of it on screen. And a lot of the time, I have notebooks that I'll write ideas down in. So it's just like this madman kind of scrawl of, oh yeah, add this and add that. Because I don't like to have comment bubbles or things messing up my first draft because they just throw me off.
Me neither. Do you guys have comment bubbles?
Can't stand comment bubbles.
I love them.
Yeah, I thought you might be.
I knew you were going to say that. But I'll use my notebook for that. And then, I'll just edit straight onto the screen. And, you know, if it's a book or a collection, you know, a novel or a collection, then I'll probably print it off once it's as finished as it possibly can be, like look at the proof so that I can spot any errors that I might not see on screen. But nowadays I'm impatient. I want to just do it. So I do it on the computer.
I had a question I wanted to ask our guests as they came on, which is why you write. Like, what brought you to writing? Like, why do it? Because it is, like you said, the first draft can be so painful.
I know.
And in fact, it's like a marathon, the whole thing. Like getting a book out or a collection of short stories is such an investment of time and energy and stealing away from your personal life and your work life. And so why?
So, you know, I ask myself that all the time, Amy. Why I started was to go back a few years. I actually did a degree in fine art. So I started off as a painter and photographer because I always wanted to tell stories and I always read. I have been a huge reader of fantasy and just everything for my whole life. And I always thought, oh, you know, I'd love to write stories, but I have no idea how to do it and I can never write it, but I can paint. So I thought that I was going to become like Kathleen Jennings and do all these wonderful illustrations for fantasy books and stuff. And then I realized that I just really liked the written word a lot more than, you know, and I studied 4 years. I did an honors degree. I was going to do a master's in photography. And then I went, no, I just like to do that for myself and not actually have to do that under a university kind of structure. But still the words, I'm like, I can't get away from them. And so I just started writing in secret when I was doing my PhD as a way of not doing my PhD. So my PhD was a literature PhD, 100,000 words of research on historical stuff that is fascinating, but I was like, I need something that's more creative. And I really felt like I was lacking that. And so I just thought, I'll secretly start writing short stories because stupidly I thought short stories would be easier than doing a novel. So I thought, I'll just start doing something short. And so I wrote this 18,000 word short story. I'm doing air quotes. And I kind of went, wow, that was really fun. And then I just had no idea about how anything worked at all. And so I thought, there was this anthology that I could send this 18,000 word behemoth to. And I did. And I just lucked out that the editor was a kind person who actually gave feedback and said, there's some spark of something in here. Let's work together and make it good. And I was like, okay, thinking that this is the romantic ideal of, isn't this how editors work with authors all the time? And so I just had this crash course of how to write short stories because of that first experience. And then that just put me on the road to go, you mean I can just start it in the middle? And all this stuff, like I had no idea what I was doing beforehand, even though I'd read like a fiend my whole life. And so that kind of just was exciting to kind of explore these other worlds as a reprieve from doing my research during the day for my thesis. And so I kept going from there. And it was just like I became, as I'm sure you guys all can identify with this, it was just like feeding this addiction of like, I've got all these stories that I want to do. And I love short stories because, as I said, I'm really impatient. And so doing short stories is great because most of the time it's more instant gratification than a novel length work, which I find so hard because it takes so long to write it. And then you send it out and it takes so long for people to get back to you. Whereas with short stories, you can write them relatively more quickly than you write a novel, and you send them out. And even if they get rejected a dozen times, at least you're getting that kind of interaction with it. So, and I just love short stories too, because they're just wonderfully perfect little creations. So I think that's what I'm going to, I don't know. I think that's why I keep writing, because I love short stories, even though they're agony at the moment as well. Everything is agony.
So tell our listeners what you've published. You've published how many collections of short stories now?
So I have, I'm looking at my bookshelf, 1, 2, 3 collections of short stories, and a 4th that's on the way in a couple of weeks, actually, and a novel that's been published, and then a novel that's with my agent at the moment doing the rounds. So the short story collections, I've got 2 that I wrote myself and 2 that I've co-written with Angela Slater. And more to come. I'm working on another one. I can't stop. I love writing short stories. I love writing collections that thematically kind of go together, which is what Bluegrass Symphony was, my first one. And the new one, Songs for Dark Seasons, is in the same world as Bluegrass Symphony, just because I love going back to those worlds. So the stories don't, it's not like a mosaic novel where you have to read them in any order, but you get a sense of the place by reading them all. And I just love doing that. So I end up doing these collections that are themed, and they all match without necessarily, I didn't intend it to be like a novel or anything like that.
So can we just give the readers, anyone who hasn't read Lisa's work, can you let us know what kind of stories you write? Like what kind of worlds they are, what kind of plots?
So these are strange, weird, sometimes very frequently dark fantasy stories. So Bluegrass Symphony and Songs for Dark Seasons are set in a kind of pseudo-American Deep South, completely invented. It's actually really influenced a lot more by Canada and Scandinavia than you would think, but, it has that kind of Deep South, poor unfortunate souls in unfortunate situations, working hard on farms and, regular crappy jobs that happen to be in a world that is also interleaved with magical encounters all the time. Magical / horrific things happen to these people. So it's set in a real world. It's our world with a twist, basically, where magic encounters happen and people just have to survive their downtrodden lives with the addition of unfortunate magic. Sounds really bleak, but I find
it sounds great. It makes me want to go buy one.
Oh, they're absolutely beautiful. Beautiful stories and beautifully written.
Thank you.
Did I launch your first book?
You launched my first book, and I feel like you were my good luck charm, because Sean launched my first book, and then the next day my thesis passed with 2 A's, and I didn't have to make any changes. And then very soon after that, Bluegrass was nominated for a World Fantasy Award for Best Collection, and I feel like it was Sean Williams who just somehow was the lucky charm.
Had nothing to do with me. It was all you, Lisa.
Well, your launch was wonderful. It was such a fun night too.
It was a great night.
So yeah, they're dark, but I find that I love these people. I love writing stories about regular people thrust into really difficult situations and seeing, the extent they're willing to go to confront these magical, horrific things, and whether or not they survive is another story.
Can I just go back a few footsteps behind us? It's interesting to me that I think all 4 of us started other degrees. I know Sean had an ambition to be an accountant. I don't know if it was an ambition, but a burning desire to be an accountant. But
he's a frustrated accountant. He sits at home,
it's never too
dreaming
late.
about numbers.
It's never too late. But it's interesting. So you're doing an arts degree. I was doing I was a wannabe actor. Amy had done a film degree. You were doing screen degree. So it's interesting. So what is it? I mean, the connection, I think, is really interesting. I know that for myself, there was a point in about my 3rd year of the acting degree where it suddenly dawned on me that everyone we were studying were writers. Like we were studying Shakespeare and Ibsen and those are the only 2 I seem to have remembered from the entire...
Brecht.
Moliere, Brecht.
Sure.
Yeah, there's more. George Bernard Shaw, so on. And suddenly I went, oh, no one gives a flip about the act. A flip. This is Alex's attempt to avoid swearing. Yeah. Nobody gives a flying flip about the actors, but, the writers are interesting. So what was the point? I mean, I'm being very... I'm sure that a lot of my actor friends and a lot of the drama students are listening to this going, you bastard. But what I find interesting is that point where you realise actually what I find engaging about this art form is actually the stories. It's not necessarily the performativity. So was there a similar thing for you, Lisa, where you were visually, I think you said, drawing fantasy worlds, or so it's still a similar imaginative exercise?
Yeah, for me it was, I really wanted to do illustration, but foolishly went to a contemporary art school. So the whole time we were strongly discouraged from painting anything figurative, anything recognizable. It was highly conceptual. And after a 4-year degree of that, I was jack of it. So I actually started focusing on photography more because I could capture the strange kind of images that I was hoping to be able to paint, but was, persuaded not to in our degree. And then even that, I always have loved figurative art. I've loved Renaissance paintings. I study anytime I could write essays or, about art history. It was always these great tableaux where you'd have the scene and the story is suggested in this frozen moment. And I realized essentially that's what I liked doing with short stories as well, is sort of starting with this strong image in my mind and then filling in the gaps of what the story is. So I think that that's where it was kind of like, I just stepped away from the visual side because I realized what I really loved was actually what the paintings weren't saying and being able to flesh that out in story and kind of, and this is also why I love short stories, because you end up suggesting more than you actually spell out when you're writing short stories. In novels, you have a little bit more leeway to flesh out the prose and really, describe things in more words. But still, when I write novel-length things, I feel I'm being flabby in my writing because I just have more words to play with. But in short stories, you can just sort of convey it with a few deft sketches of words. And I think that that's what painting a tableau was, where you just get this image and you have to fill in all the gaps between, what you think is going on. And so those sort of things always were a connection for me. But it was like, I found that it was much more satisfying to write and convey and have people come up with the images in their own heads than me trying to paint something that wasn't necessarily getting it all. That, it wasn't, I found that I was a better writer than I was a painter, and I was a really good photographer, and I still love doing photography, but it was just words were conveying a lot more. It wasn't so static as what you would get in some photos. So I just ended up kind of veering down that path.
So a couple of things occurred to me as you were talking. One is that writing is so liberating because you don't need materials.
Yeah.
You don't need, like with acting, you need a stage and a play and other people often. With music, like with Sean, you need equipment or you need
a kazoo.
Yeah, you need paints, you need space, you need writing you can do anywhere. Even if you don't have a laptop or a pen, you can sit and do it in your own head.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys would do that, right? Like if you're stuck on a bus and you're bored, you're turning it into a story in your head all the time. And the second thing that occurred to me is that when I look at you guys on this screen as I'm talking to you, is that none of us just do one art form.
No.
Like, and even away from the ones we've studied, everyone either gardens or cooks or dances or does photography or there's always other things that you're doing.
Yeah.
Interior decoration. Like there are all kinds of art forms. Every artist I know, every writer I know seems to sort of dabble in multiple art forms all the time.
And I think the lack of a need of equipment is a huge thing. I mean, painting is hugely messy and it's expensive, and it's best if you have a studio, especially if you're painting with oils because it's really stinky and, all that sort of stuff. But also the thing you said about being on a bus, like I find that the best ideas and the best thinking happen when I'm on public transport, whether it's a train or a bus or, when you're in that liminal zone, you can't do anything. All you can do is listen to music and look out the window or whatever. And I find that I mentioned the few occasions that I've had stories actually come and the writing was really fast has always been when I've been on a train overseas and I'm doing nothing but sitting there listening to good music and gazing out the window and letting your back brain do that percolating thing. And then it's like I get this feeling that only happens occasionally where you're just like overwhelmed with the need to just like get out your phone or your notepad or whatever and just write the notes down so fast before they disappear. And it's like the scenes actually just come out in order and it's just amazing. And that only ever happens on the train. I would love to have a writing writing residency on a train. I would get so much done.
We should try and convince the gang to do that again.
Oh my God. I just want to sit in a little, it doesn't even have to be my own cabin on a train. I just want to sit in my own little spot on the train for hours. Oh my gosh. I would have a whole book in no time.
I wanted to be a train driver when I was a kid. There's still time. I used to collect trains, had Lego trains, trains everywhere. Do you think that, given that we all have interests in other art forms, that in some way informs the way we approach writing? Because I'm probably a character guy because that's an actor's brain, right? Going, okay, who are the characters? How do they interact? What's their conflict?
Yeah.
Whereas what it feels like Lisa's describing is this desire to create a magical world, which comes from a very cruel art course by the sounds of it, where you're not allowed to draw what you want.
And having read your writing as well, your writing is very visual, like incredibly visual. Like it is a sense of entering a kind of painted world.
It's really interesting that you point that out, because I often ask my students, if they are driven first by character or if they're driven first by world building, especially if they're writing fantasy, what is the thing that has really hooked them into writing a story? And 90% of the students will say characters, which most writers will say that they're, really interested in the character and their inner world, and they want to explore that character and write their story. Whereas most of the time, I'm really interested in the world and the characters that inhabit and how the world affects those characters. So it really is about making this kind of strange other world that may or may not overlap with us. Like sometimes I'll write secondary stuff, but a lot of the time it's a skewed view of our own world. And then I do think of artistic tableau and I try to picture what it looks like. And then, it's almost like a static moment that then develops into something more active, I hope anyways. Otherwise people will be bored when they read the stories. But the world is really, for me, it's like obviously characters are important and they are critical in writing a story, but I often like to think about how this character fits into its world and how the character is affected by or prevented by the world, or, how the world is the impediment rather than necessarily other characters.
So we're coming sadly to the end of this episode already. It's been, time has flown, Lisa, talking to you. I've got a couple of quick questions left for you. What's the best or worst advice you've ever received in your writing life?
Oh,
just putting you on the spot.
I'm trying to think of the worst advice, and I can't think of one. I guess the best advice I ever got that I can think of that always comes to mind is when I was at Clarion. So this wasn't from you, Sean. It was from one of the other tutors. But I mean, you gave me a lot of good advice as well that has stuck with me, especially like looking at a short story like a diamond, that you're just exploring one facet, but you can see the other facets of the world through that diamond. That image has stuck with me for the past 10 years. So thank you. But the best advice that I've gotten was from Jeff Vandermeer, who said, Lisa, you write a particular type of fiction, which is weird, often dense prose. It might be a bit confronting. It might be a bit hard for people to get through. And I was like, yes. And he goes, so I advise you to work on the whole draft before you get a critique on it, because probably what's going to happen is you'll crit a story that's half done. People will say a bunch of negative stuff about it, and you might get discouraged halfway through. And I went, yeah, I think that's a really astute observation. And so it was basically that kind of thing of know your own practice, know what works for you, and then go with it. And I do get people to read my stories and give me feedback, but I also know that I am vulnerable to people saying crappy things about my writing when it's not done. And so I don't want to throw myself off track. So I've always remembered that, because he writes similarly weird stuff. And so I think he was giving me that advice from a place of sympathy. And so I just went, okay, I will bear that in mind. And I always try to get to the end of a draft, even if I feel like it's not working, before giving it to someone so they can point out, yeah, it's not working, but this is where, and I feel like I have something whole to work with, and I won't feel so discouraged to get into draft 2 then.
And the last question, what does success look like to you?
This has changed many times over the years. I realized a long time ago that I'm a person that likes to have lots of stuff to do. So success for me doesn't necessarily mean writing full time and doing nothing but writing, because I end up feeling really lonely and I don't get much writing done then because I'm just sitting at home feeling sad. So instead, I feel like success is continuing to write and continuing to get stuff out there. So I'm doing other stuff on the side. I have a job, I'm doing a bunch of other things, but getting my books published, getting stories published, interacting with lovely people like you guys, that makes me feel like I have a career that's continuing to move forward. Whether or not if I become the next J.K. Rowling, hey, if I did, maybe then I'd be a full-time writer, because I'm sure I'd be busy with other stuff as well. But, just having that continued sense that I've got projects that are on the go and projects that are going to come out at some point, or that I'm going to keep putting out in the world and hope will come out. That to me feels like I'm being successful.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for being our guinea pig, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
And it's not the same thing as sitting down and having a hot chocolate with you.
No, it's not.
Having a chat.
One day we'll sit around a real table together.
Yeah, it won't be long. We'll all attend your book launches and bring champagne.
Yay!
Hooray!
Alex will bring Moscato.
Yeah, the Moscato. You can have all that to yourself, Alex.
I'm the only one that really likes it. But,
No, Sean likes
that's
it.
Okay.
You two are both the biggest sweet tooths I've ever met. It's all chocolate Moscato.
Thank you, Alex and Amy, too.
Bye.
Thank you all. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, Lisa.
Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
And this is Lisa's clap. What a lame clap that was.
Oh,
I can't do this anymore without thinking about the story about having to be taught to do a high five.
I know, it's my favourite story. Sean, that is my favourite.
Sean had to be taught how to do a high five. He couldn't do one.
at the end of every episode, we have an outtake, and there's one where I did a clap and it sort of went... And I explained that I missed my hand and couldn't do a high five and shared a really vulnerable moment.
And now you're the butt of everyone's joke.
Yeah. Shared a really vulnerable moment with two horrible people.
Yeah.
That's what he did.
Yeah. Well, note to self, I'm going to be guarding everything I say today.